I just asked for some water, and my daughter shouted, "We are not your servants." Right in my face as I lay exhausted in the house I had paid for with my life, fresh from heart surgery. I, the father, who had given everything for her happiness, felt a betrayal deeper than any pain. They thought they were unpunished and had power over me. But then I said, "You have 72 hours to leave this house. You will not believe what happened next." Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and let us know where you're listening in the comments. Could you bring me a glass of water? The words left my mouth before I'd even settled into the armchair. 3 days in the hospital had left me parched in ways that went deeper than thirst. The surgical tape pulled at my chest with every breath, a constant reminder of what my heart had just endured. Haley froze in the kitchen doorway. Her expression shifted from mild annoyance to something colder. "Seriously, I just got home from the hospital." My voice sounded weaker than I intended. The drive had exhausted me more than I'd expected, and now even this simple conversation felt like climbing stairs. She crossed her arms. The gesture was sharp, deliberate. "We're not your servants." The words hit harder than any physical blow. I stared at my daughter, searching for some trace of the little girl who used to bring me dandelions from the yard. Nothing. Her face held the same expression she might use on a stranger, asking for spare change. I spent 3 days in the hospital after heart surgery. Each word came out carefully measured, as if speaking too quickly might tear something inside me. "I'm asking for water." Kyan didn't even look up from the television. The remote control rested in his lap like a scepter of indifference. Some game show blared laugh tracks while my request hung unanswered in the air between us. "The kitchen's right there." Haley gestured vaguely toward the sink, her wedding ring catching the afternoon light streaming through the window. "You've got legs." I gripped the armrests and pushed myself up. The surgical site screamed in protest, sending sharp ribbons of pain across my chest. My vision wavered for a moment, and I had to pause halfway between sitting and standing. The stitches felt like they might split apart, leaving me bleeding on the carpet of my own living room. "Easy there, Dad." Haley's voice carried no warmth, just the kind of hollow concern people use when they don't want to appear completely heartless, don't want you falling and making even more work for us. More work? As if caring for the man who'd raised her was some unwelcome burden that had been thrust upon her. I thought about all the glasses of water I'd brought her during childhood fevers, all the midnight comfort when nightmares had stolen her sleep. Those memories felt like they belonged to someone else's life. My legs shook as I took the first step toward the kitchen. Each movement sent jolts through my torso, but I refused to sit back down. Not now. Not when the truth was spreading across my vision like spilled ink on white paper. "This is ridiculous," Con finally spoke, his eyes still fixed on the screen, acting like he's dying or something. It was just a little heart procedure. Little procedure. I'd flatlined twice on the operating table, but apparently that qualified as little in their world. The surgeon had explained the complications, the close calls, the miracle that I was even walking around. None of that seemed to register with the two people who should have cared most. The kitchen felt miles away instead of just across the room. Each step was a negotiation between my will and my body's limitations. Behind me I could hear Haley's exasperated sigh, the kind she used to reserve for traffic jams and long grocery store lines. "Next thing you know, he'll want us to cook his meals too," she muttered to Con. "Don't give him ideas." Keon's chuckle was dry, empty of any real humor. I reached the counter and gripped its edge. The cool surface steadied me while I processed what I'd just heard. These weren't temporary frustrations or stress-induced comments. This was who they really were when they thought I couldn't hear. Or maybe they simply didn't care if I could. The glass trembled in my hand as I filled it from the tap. Water had never tasted so bitter, even though it was just ordinary water from the same faucet I'd used for 20 years. Everything was the same, yet nothing would ever be the same again. When I turned around, they were both watching me with expressions that mixed impatience with barely concealed disgust. My own daughter looked at me like I was some inconvenient stranger who had wandered into her house uninvited. The glass felt heavy in my hand, not from its weight, but from the weight of understanding that was settling into my bones like winter cold. I'd built this house with my own hands, paid for their education, their wedding, their car payments. I'd given them everything I had, and they couldn't even bring me water after heart surgery. I walked back to my chair slowly, deliberately, not because the pain demanded it, though it did, but because I needed time to think, time to plan, time to decide what kind of man I was going to be for whatever years I had left. The afternoon sun slanted lower through the windows, casting longer shadows across the room. Somewhere in those shadows, something was beginning to take shape, something that would make them understand exactly what they'd lost when they decided I wasn't worth basic human kindness. I settled back into my chair and took another sip of water. It still tasted bitter, but now there was something else mixed in, something that felt dangerously close to satisfaction. They had no idea what was coming. Walking to my bedroom felt like crossing a desert. Each step sent aftershocks through my chest, reminding me that my body was still healing, even if my illusions had just shattered completely. The hallway stretched longer than usual. Family photos on the walls watching me with faces that suddenly seemed like strangers. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it for a moment. The bedroom had always been my sanctuary, the place where my late wife Sarah and I had shared our dreams and plans. Now it felt like a refuge for my own family. The bed welcomed me like an old friend as I carefully lowered myself onto the mattress. My surgical sight protested with sharp reminders of recent trauma, but the emotional wounds cut deeper than any scalpel ever could. I stared at the ceiling, replaying those venomous words over and over. "We're not your servants." My own daughter had looked at me like I was some burden she had to endure. The same daughter whose college tuition I had paid without question, whose wedding had cost me nearly $20,000, whose car payments I had covered when Kayan lost his job last year. Memory has a way of flooding back when you need it most. 5 years ago, after Sarah's funeral, I had sat in this very spot, making one of the biggest decisions of my life. The insurance money had been substantial, enough to buy something smaller for myself and help my daughter start her married life properly. I remembered driving to the real estate office, my hands shaking as I signed the deed transfer papers. The house, this house, had been my gift to Haley and Kayan. 3 bedrooms, 2 bathrooms, a finished basement, and a yard where I had imagined future grandchildren playing. "Dad, this is too much," Haley had whispered that day, tears streaming down her face. "We can't accept this." But I had insisted. "Family takes care of family," I told her. "Your mother would have wanted you to have security." Keon had shaken my hand with what seemed like genuine gratitude, promising that I would always have a place here, that they would take care of me when I got older. Those promises felt like smoke now, dissipating in the harsh light of reality. The afternoon sun slanted through the curtains, casting familiar shadows across furniture I had bought decades ago. Everything in this room belonged to me once. Now it was all legally theirs, and they treated me like an unwelcome guest in what used to be my own home. I thought about the other gifts, The countless times I had opened my wallet without hesitation when Cayenne's business venture failed and they needed $5,000 to avoid bankruptcy. When Haley wanted to redecorate the kitchen and the estimate came to $8,000. When their car broke down and they needed something reliable right away. Every time I had said yes, every time they had been grateful and loving, but somewhere along the way, gratitude had transformed into expectation, and expectation had hardened into entitlement. My chest tightened, though. Whether from the surgical site or from the weight of understanding, I couldn't tell. The pattern was so clear now that I wondered how I had missed it for so long. They had stopped seeing me as a person who chose to be generous and started seeing me as an obligation-free source of money and support. The business cards in my wallet felt heavy with possibility. Michael O'Connor, attorney at law. I had used him for the house transfer and other legal matters over the years. A good man who understood family dynamics and financial planning. Sitting up took effort, but the decision was forming in my mind like storm clouds gathering on a clear day. I reached for the nightstand where I kept my address book, my fingers moving with more purpose than they had felt in days. There were options I hadn't considered before. Legal options that might help them understand the true value of what they had taken for granted. Saturday morning arrived with the kind of clarity that only comes after a sleepless night of decision-making. I had called Michael O'Connor at 8 sharp, apologizing for the weekend disruption, but explaining that I needed urgent consultation on a family matter. His voice carried the same steady professionalism I remembered from our previous dealings. Of course, Mr. Richardson, given everything you've been through with your surgery, I can be there by 10 ontic. Haley and Cayenne had left for their weekly shopping routine around 9:30, their departure accompanied by the usual symphony of car doors and casual conversation that suggested nothing had changed in their world. Perfect timing. Michael arrived precisely at 10 o'clock. Carrying the same worn leather briefcase he'd brought to every meeting over the past decade. His gray suit spoke of weekend sacrifice made without complaint, and his firm handshake reminded me why I had chosen him for important matters. Please sit wherever you're comfortable. I gestured toward the living room, grateful that my physical strength had returned enough to handle business properly. He settled into the chair across from mine, opening his briefcase with practiced efficiency. You mentioned family concerns on the phone. How can I help? I had rehearsed this moment during my wakeful hours, choosing words that would convey necessity without revealing too much emotion. I need to review the legal standing of the house gift I made to my daughter 5 years ago. Specifically, what options might exist if circumstances have changed significantly? Michael's eyebrows lifted slightly, but his expression remained professionally neutral. The property transferred to Haley. Correct. Let me pull those files. Documents rustled as he arranged papers across my coffee table. The deed transfer, gift documentation, tax forms, all the paperwork that had seemed so straightforward when love and generosity guided my decisions. Now they look different, like maps to territories I hadn't known existed. The house is completely yours, Mr. Richardson. His words stopped me mid-thought. Excuse me. Legally speaking, you retain full ownership rights. Michael's finger traced across a specific paragraph in the deed document. The transfer was structured as a conditional gift with reversionary provisions, standard practice for family property transfers. Actually, my heart rate increased, though whether from the surgery's lingering effects or sudden hope, I couldn't determine. What does that mean exactly? It means that while Haley holds title, the property reverts to you automatically under certain specified conditions. He turned the document toward me, pointing to dense legal text I had signed, but never fully understood. material change in circumstances, failure to provide agreed-upon care or housing, or breach of family obligations. The words swam before my eyes as their implications crystallized. 5 years ago, Michael had insisted on these protections, explaining them as standard safeguards that I had barely listened to in my eagerness to provide for my daughter's future. How quickly could such a reversion take effect? I asked, surprised by the steadiness in my own voice, with proper documentation of changed circumstances, 30 days from filing notice. Michael's tone remained matter-of-fact, as if we were discussing tax preparation rather than reclaiming my life. You would need to demonstrate material breach of the original gift conditions. I thought about yesterday's confrontation, about months of increasingly entitled behavior, about becoming a stranger in my own home. Material breach seemed like an understatement. What kind of documentation would be required? Witness statements, evidence of changed circumstances, documentation of breached agreements. Michael gathered the papers into a neat stack, though I should mention this would require careful consideration. Family property disputes can have lasting consequences. Through the window, I could see Mrs. Henderson from next door working in her garden. Normal Saturday morning activities continuing, while my world quietly shifted on its axis. The house felt different now, knowing that it was still legally mine, that I wasn't as powerless as I had believed. What would the timeline look like for gathering such documentation? That depends on what evidence exists and how quickly you want to proceed. Michael closed his briefcase but left the documents within my reach. Are we talking about immediate action, or are you exploring options for future consideration? The question hung between us like a bridge I hadn't yet decided to cross. In the distance, I could hear the familiar sound of a car approaching. Probably too early for Haley and Con's return, but it reminded me that my time for private planning had limits. I think, I said carefully, that I need to test whether the current situation might improve before making any irreversible decisions. Michael nodded with the wisdom of someone who had guided other families through similar crossroads. That sounds prudent. Perhaps we should discuss what that test might look like. Evening brought the familiar sound of car doors slamming and shopping bags rustling. I positioned myself near the kitchen sink, timing my presence to appear natural when they entered. The afternoon had been spent processing Michael's revelations, and now I felt ready to conduct my experiment. Haley pushed through the front door first, arms loaded with department store bags. Her designer sunglasses caught the hallway light as she kicked off her shoes with practiced indifference. Cayenne followed, juggling car keys and what looked like takeout containers. "How was your day out?" I asked, keeping my voice genuinely interested. "Fine." Haley's response carried the same dismissive tone I remembered from yesterday, but now I heard it differently, not as a daughter's casual reply, but as evidence for a legal file. They moved through the living room toward the kitchen, and I waited until they had settled their belongings before making my request. Strategic timing mattered for this test. "Could you grab me a glass of water while you're up?" The question stopped Haley mid-motion as she reached for her purse. Her expression shifted from neutral to annoyed in the space of a heartbeat. "Can't you get up yourself?" Perfect. Almost exactly the same reaction as yesterday, but now I was prepared to push further. "I'm still recovering from surgery. It would really help." Cayenne looked up from his phone with visible irritation. "You walked to the kitchen just fine. What's the big deal about walking a few more steps?" I maintained my calm tone, though internally I was cataloging every cruel word for Michael's documentation. "I was hoping you might show a little consideration for your father who just had heart surgery." "Enough of this drama." Con's voice carried the edge of someone whose convenience had been threatened. "You're not an invalid. Stop acting like one. Haley nodded in agreement, her wedding ring glinting as she gestured dismissively. Seriously, Dad, you can't expect us to wait on you hand and foot just because you had a medical procedure. Medical procedure? As if my heart stopping twice on the operating table was comparable to getting a tooth cleaned. I stood slowly, making sure they could see the effort it took. The way my hand pressed against my chest, where the surgical site still ached. I see. My voice remained steady, though something cold had settled in my stomach. So asking for help from my family is unreasonable. When you can help yourself? Yes. Haley's words came out sharp and final. We're not your personal servants. There it was again. That phrase that had shattered my illusions yesterday now served as confirmation of what I already knew. They hadn't changed. If anything, they seemed more comfortable with their cruelty, as if yesterday's confrontation had given them permission to stop pretending. I walked to the sink and filled my glass, each step deliberate and measured. Behind me, I could hear them resuming their normal evening routine. Haley sorting through shopping bags, Keen settling into his favorite chair with the television remote. The water tasted exactly like it had yesterday, but this time I wasn't drinking it with the bitter taste of broken expectations. This time I was drinking it with the satisfaction of a man who had just gathered the evidence he needed. Did you find everything you needed while you were out? I asked, returning to where they sat. Most of it. Haley didn't look up from examining her purchases, though. I'll probably need to go back next weekend for that lamp I wanted for the bedroom. Our bedroom. The bedroom in the house that legally belonged to me, where she was planning purchases with money that would better serve someone who actually deserved this place. Every casual assumption of ownership, every dismissive comment, every moment of callous indifference was building a case that Michael could use. I nodded thoughtfully. That sounds like a good plan. Khan glanced at me with suspicion, as if my reasonable response was somehow uncertain. You feeling all right? You seem different today. Different. If only he knew how different things were about to become. But that conversation would wait for another day, when I had all my pieces in position, and 30 days' notice had been properly filed. Just thinking about family, I said truthfully, about what really matters. They returned to their evening activities, apparently satisfied that I had accepted my place in their hierarchy. The television flickered with some reality show where people competed for money they hadn't earned, which seemed remarkably appropriate. I finished my water and set the glass down carefully. Tomorrow I would call Michael again. 20 minutes later, I stood in the living room doorway and made my decision. I need you both to leave my house. The silence that followed felt like the moment before lightning strikes. Haley's magazine slipped from her hands, landing on the coffee table with a soft thud. Keon's thumb froze over his phone screen, his expression shifting from casual indifference to sharp attention. What did you just say? Haley's voice carried a dangerous edge I had never heard before. This is my house. I want you to pack your things and find somewhere else to live. Each word came out steady and clear, backed by Michael's morning revelation about my legal rights. Keon stood up slowly, his full height adding weight to his presence. You're kidding, right? This is our home. No, I replied calmly. This is my home. I gave it to you as a gift. But that gift came with conditions. You've broken those conditions. Haley jumped to her feet, her face flushed with anger, and something that looked remarkably like panic. You can't just kick us out. We live here. We have rights. Actually, you don't. The confidence in my voice surprised even me. I spoke with my lawyer this morning. The deed transfer included reversionary clauses. When you fail to provide the care and respect that were part of our original agreement, ownership reverts back to me. The color drained from Haley's face as the implications hit her. No more free housing, no more financial safety net, no more taking everything for granted while treating me like an unwelcome burden. You're bluffing. Con moved closer, his posture shifting into something more threatening. You're just mad about yesterday trying to scare us. I'm completely serious. You have 30 days... 3 days to find alternative arrangements. Con's laugh held no humor whatsoever. 30 days. Where exactly do you think we're supposed to go? Do you have any idea how much rent costs these days? That's not my concern anymore. I remained standing, though the surgical site in my chest had begun to ache from the tension. You made it clear yesterday and again today that caring for your recovering father is too much trouble. So I'm removing that burden from your lives. Haley stepped between us, her voice rising with desperation. Dad, please, we can work this out. Maybe we were having a bad day, but we can change. It's too late for that conversation. You're not going anywhere. Keon's shout echoed off the living room walls as he moved to block the doorway. This is ridiculous. You can't just come in here making threats and demands like you own the place. I do own the place. The statement hung in the air like a challenge none of us could take back. I watched as shock transformed into something much more dangerous in both their faces. This wasn't going according to any plan they had imagined. Haley grabbed my arm, her fingers digging in harder than necessary. You need to sit down and think about this rationally. You're not thinking clearly since your surgery. My thinking is perfectly clear. I tried to step around her, but Cayenne moved to block my path again. Where do you think you're going? His voice carried the unmistakable threat of physical confrontation to my bedroom to call my lawyer. No, you're not. CN reached into my pocket and pulled out my cell phone before I could react. You're going to sit down, and we're going to talk about this like adults. My heart rate spiked, sending sharp reminders through my chest that my body wasn't ready for this kind of stress. Give me my phone back. When you start making sense. Haley positioned herself on my other side, and I realized with growing alarm that they were coordinating their movements to control mine. This is insane. You can't just... Can't what? Con interrupted. Can't protect our family from your crazy old man threats. Can't make sure you don't do something you'll regret later. They guided me toward the hallway, their grip firm, but not quite painful. Yet my surgical recovery had left me weaker than I wanted to admit, and fighting both of them simultaneously was beyond my current physical capabilities. You're making a serious mistake, I warned, as they steered me toward my bedroom. The only mistake, Haley said, pushing open the bedroom door, is letting you get this worked up over nothing. They guided me inside, and Cayenne pocketed my phone with the satisfied expression of someone who had just solved a complicated problem. We'll talk about this tomorrow when you've calmed down, Haley announced. The bedroom door closed with a decisive click, followed by the unmistakable sound of the lock turning from the outside. 30 minutes of testing the door handle and examining the window had confirmed what I already suspected. I was thoroughly trapped. The lock held firm, and the window, while it opened, led to a 15-foot drop onto concrete. My surgical recovery made such an escape impossible, even if desperation might have otherwise driven me to attempt it. But the window offered something else entirely. Joshua Palmer was in his backyard, coiling up a garden hose as the evening light faded into that perfect suburban twilight. I had known Joshua for 3 years, ever since he'd moved in next door. A decent man who kept his property neat and always waved when we encountered each other at the mailbox, pushing the window open wider. I positioned myself where he could see me. "Joshua, help me." His head snapped up immediately, searching for the source of the voice. When his eyes found mine in the bedroom window, his expression shifted from confusion to concern in a heartbeat. "Peter, what's wrong?" He dropped the hose and moved closer to the fence line between our properties. "I need you to call the police." The words felt strange coming out of my mouth, but the situation had moved far beyond family disputes. My daughter and her husband have locked me in this room and taken my phone. Joshua's face transformed into something I had never seen before, a mix of alarm and disbelief that told me he was processing information that didn't fit his understanding of normal neighborhood problems. "Are you hurt? Do you need an ambulance?" "No ambulance, just police. I'm recovering from heart surgery, and they're using that to control me physically." I kept my voice steady, knowing that panic would make him less likely to take effective action. He was already reaching for his cell phone. "Hold on, Peter. I'm calling right now." Relief flooded through me as I watched him dial. This was working. Help was actually coming. 911, what's your emergency?" I could hear the dispatcher's voice clearly through his speaker. "I need police." Joshua looked up at me questioningly. 4715 Maple Street, I called down. "Tell them it's a family dispute involving unlawful confinement of an elderly man." Joshua repeated the information, adding details about my medical condition and the locked door situation. The dispatcher asked several follow-up questions, and Joshua looked to me for answers about whether I was in immediate physical danger and how long this had been going on. "Officers are being dispatched," the dispatcher finally announced. "Estimated arrival time is 8 to 10 minutes. Joshua ended the call and looked back up at my window. "They're coming, Peter. Do you want me to stay out here until they arrive?" "Yes, please." And Joshua, "Thank you. I know this is unusual. Don't worry about it." His voice carried the steadiness of someone who had made his decision and would see it through. "Is there anything else I should tell the officers when they get here?" Through the bedroom door, I could hear muffled voices from the living room. Haley and Kyan were talking, though I couldn't make out specific words. They seemed calm, probably discussing their next move, or simply waiting for me to come to my senses, as they had put it. "Tell them this involves a property dispute," I said carefully. "My daughter and her husband are trying to prevent me from exercising my legal rights as the homeowner." Joshua nodded, absorbing this information with the seriousness it deserved. "Got it. Property dispute, unlawful confinement, elderly man with recent heart surgery." The sound of a car engine rumbled in the distance, though it was too early to be the police response. Still, my heart rate increased with anticipation. This nightmare was about to shift in my favor. "They should be here soon," Joshua called up reassuringly. From the living room came the sound of footsteps, and what might have been Haley's voice, saying something about checking on me. The timing was about to become very interesting. I positioned myself near the door to listen while keeping sight of Joshua through the window. The next few minutes would determine whether my family's attempt to control me through physical intimidation would succeed or backfire spectacularly. "I can see a police car turning onto Maple," Joshua announced. Footsteps rushed down the hallway toward my door. The lock clicked open and Haley appeared with a concerned expression that would have won her an Academy Award. "Dad, are you feeling all right?" "You seem agitated." Her voice carried the perfect blend of worry and confusion, as if she had found me in some kind of medical distress, rather than locked behind a door she had secured herself. "The police are here," I said, stepping past her into the hallway. "Police? Why would police be here?" Cohn emerged from the living room, his face a masterpiece of bewildered concern. "Did something happen?" Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. Haley immediately took my arm, guiding me toward the front door with the gentle touch of a devoted daughter helping her fragile father. "Let me get that," she said, opening the door to reveal two officers, a man and woman in their 30s, both carrying the professional demeanor that comes with years of domestic calls. "Good evening. I'm Officer Edward. This is Officer Chloe. We received a call about a family dispute." "There must be some mistake," Haley said, her voice perfectly pitched with confusion. "We're just having a quiet evening at home. My father just had heart surgery, so we're being very careful with him." I stepped forward. "Officers, I called you through my neighbor because my daughter and her husband locked me in my bedroom and confiscated my phone." Officer Chloe's eyes moved between us, noting the body language and positioning. "Sir, can you tell us exactly what happened tonight? They physically forced me into my bedroom and locked the door from the outside when I told them they needed to leave my house." Each word came out clear and deliberate. Haley's hand flew to her chest in apparent shock. "Dad, that's not what happened at all. You were feeling dizzy and confused, so we helped you to your room to rest. The door wasn't locked. You were just having trouble with the handle. The door was definitely locked," I insisted. Kayan moved closer, positioning himself supportively near Haley. "Mr. Richardson has been having some confusion since his surgery last week. The anesthesia can affect elderly patients for days afterward. We've been trying to help him, but he's been making accusations that don't make sense." Officer Edward pulled out a notebook. "Sir, when did you have this surgery?" "Monday, but I'm not confused. They locked me in that room because I told them to leave my house. Dad is just confused after the anesthesia," Haley said, her voice carrying the patient tone of someone dealing with a difficult medical situation. "He's been saying strange things as all day. We love him and we're trying to take care of him, but it's been challenging." Officer Chloe looked around the living room, which appeared completely normal. No signs of struggle, no evidence of the confrontation that had taken place an hour earlier. "Mr. Richardson, do you feel safe in this house?" "Not when they lock me in rooms and take my phone." "We didn't take your phone, Dad." Haley reached into her pocket and produced my cell phone. "You left it on the kitchen counter. We were charging it for you." The smooth delivery of that lie stunned me. She handed the phone to Officer Edward, who examined it briefly before returning it to me. "Mr. Richardson, have you been taking any pain medications since your surgery?" "Some, but I'm not confused or delusional." My voice carried increasing frustration as I realized how this was playing out. Officer Edward glanced at his partner. "Ma'am, has your father been exhibiting any other signs of confusion or disorientation?" Haley nodded sadly. "He keeps insisting this is his house and that he wants us to leave, but we live here. We take care of him. This afternoon he was demanding we bring him water and getting very upset when we suggested he could get it himself, because I just had heart surgery." "We know, Dad." Kayan's voice was gentle, understanding, "but the doctor said light activity was good for your recovery. We're just trying to follow medical advice." Officer Chloe took notes as she observed our conversation. "Mr. Richardson, do you remember what you said to your neighbor tonight?" "Yes, because they had locked me in my room." "He was confused about the door handle," Haley explained. "The bedroom door sticks sometimes, especially for someone who's not at full strength yet." The officers exchanged a look that told me everything I needed to know about how this was going to end. They saw an elderly man recovering from major surgery, possibly confused by medication, making accusations against family members who appeared concerned and caring. "Folks, it seems like there might be some misunderstanding here related to post-surgical recovery," Officer Edwards said diplomatically. "Mr. Richardson, if you feel unsafe or need help, you can always call us. But right now, I don't see evidence of any crime being committed. They stayed for another 10 minutes asking basic questions and taking notes. But the outcome was predetermined from the moment Haley produced my phone and blamed everything on surgical confusion. After the officers left, the house fell into an ominous quiet. Haley and Keon stood near the front door, their expressions transforming back to the cold calculation I had seen earlier. "That was a very stupid thing to do," Keon said, his voice carrying a threat that the officers had never heard. "They locked me in my bedroom again, but this time they took everything from me, from my phone to my documents. The 90 minutes I spent in that bedroom gave me time to think, and my thoughts led me to a decision that my body would probably not like." The window beckoned me like a challenge I couldn't ignore. 15 feet to the ground. For a healthy person, it would be doable. But for someone who had undergone heart surgery 5 days ago, it could end in disaster. But remaining imprisoned in my own home seemed a worse fate than risking a fall. I opened the window as wide as possible, studying the fall. The landscape below offered some mercy, a flower bed with soft soil rather than concrete pavement. Small blessings for desperate people. From my daughter and her husband's room came the sounds of television, laughter, and casual conversation. Haley and Kaylin settled into their evening routine, confident that their performance in front of the police had solved the problem once and for all. That confidence would work to my advantage. Climbing out the window requires core strength, which heart surgery temporarily robs you of. Every movement sent sharp reminders through my chest, but the humiliation of being outsmarted by my own family burned hotter than any physical pain. I pushed one leg through the opening, then the other, until I sat on the windowsill like an elderly burglar planning the most pathetic robbery in the world. The ground seemed farther away from this angle, and I wondered briefly if despair always felt like this, like standing on the edge of something with no good options. The fall shook every bone in my body when I finally let go. Pain shot through the surgical incision like electricity, and for a moment I lay motionless in the flower bed, waiting to see if anything important had torn. When no immediate disaster announced itself, I struggled to my feet and brushed the soil off my clothes. Moving around the perimeter of the house required stealth that I hadn't needed since playing hide-and-seek as a child. Every step had to be calculated to avoid the gravel path and the motion sensor near the garage. The familiar landscape of my own property had turned into an obstacle course. At the front door, I crouched down carefully and lifted the doormat. The spare key was exactly where I had put it 3 years ago, a simple precaution that now seemed providential. My fingers trembled slightly as I inserted it into the lock. Whether from tension or excitement, I couldn't tell. The door opened silently on the hinges I had oiled myself last month. Inside the house felt different than it had an hour ago. No longer a prison, but not quite a home either. Something in between, a battlefield where the first skirmish had gone badly, but the war was far from over. Voices drifted from the living room, relaxed and casual. They were discussing plans for the weekend. Ordinary household conversations between people who believed they had successfully neutralized the threat. The irony would have been funny if it weren't so outrageous. I carefully made my way to my bedroom, avoiding the creaky floorboards and direct view from the living room. My goal was not confrontation. Not yet. First, I needed access to my documents, my lawyer's contact information, and the legal weapons Michael had confirmed I had. The hallway stretched out before me like a path to reclaiming everything they were trying to take away. Each step brought me closer to the documents that would prove I was neither confused nor powerless, just temporarily outmaneuvered. In the living room lay the details of the deed, Michael's business card, and the detailed notes I had taken during our morning consultation. With these tools and my newfound mobility, the game could begin again, this time with different rules and a player who understood exactly what he was fighting for. They were about to find out how wrong they were. After gathering everything I needed, I returned to my bedroom. The next morning, climbing out the window as before, I headed to Michael's office, which that morning seemed like a sanctuary. Polished wood and legal reference books, embodying order in a world that had temporarily lost its balance. He agreed to meet me at 8, sacrificing his day off for a situation he clearly recognized as urgent. "Mr. Richardson, you look like you haven't slept much." He poured coffee from a thermos he had brought from home. "Tell me what's happened since yesterday." I explained the evening's events, the confrontation, the confinement, the police call that backfired spectacularly. Michael listened without interruption, occasionally making notes on a legal pad. "So they physically locked you in your own bedroom and convinced responding officers that you were confused due to surgery." His tone carried professional outrage that felt enormously validating. "Exactly. They're skilled manipulators, and they used my medical condition against me." Michael leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled in the classic lawyer thinking pose. "This changes everything. What we discussed yesterday as a possibility has now become a necessity." He pulled out the folder from our previous meeting, spreading documents across his desk, like a general planning a campaign. "The gift deed revocation we discussed. We're no longer talking about exploring options. We're talking about immediate action. How quickly can we proceed given the circumstances you've described?" Quite quickly, Michael reached for a thick legal reference book. Washington state law is clear about gift revocation in cases of ingratitude. When recipients treat the donor with hostility, cruelty, or fail to fulfill implied conditions of care, the gift can be legally revoked. The words fell on my ears like music. After 24 hours of feeling powerless, I was remembering what it felt like to have options. What exactly would the process involve? Michael opened his laptop and began typing. "First, we prepare a formal notice of gift revocation. This document outlines the legal grounds, their hostile treatment, failure to provide reasonable care during your recovery, and the change circumstances that justify reclaiming the property. And then we serve them with the notice. They have 30 days to vacate the premises." His fingers continued moving across the keyboard as he pulled up legal templates and precedent cases. "If they refuse, we can pursue immediate legal action for unlawful possession." The efficiency of legal machinery felt intoxicating after the chaos of family manipulation. Here were rules, procedures, deadlines, things that couldn't be argued away with crocodile tears and claims of post-surgical confusion. What if they contest it? They can try, but the burden of proof shifts to them to demonstrate that their treatment of you is reasonable and that they fulfilled the implicit conditions of the gift. Michael's smile carried the confidence of someone who had seen this type of case before. "Given what you've described, and particularly the incident with the police, I doubt they'll want this matter examined in detail by a court." Michael spent the next hour drafting documents, explaining each section as he worked. The formal legal language felt like armor, protection against the emotional manipulation that had nearly cost me everything. "The notice of gift revocation will be ready for service tomorrow morning," he announced, printing multiple copies on official letterhead. "I recommend having it served by a professional process server, rather than attempting to deliver it yourself. And if they try to claim I'm mentally incompetent, that's actually working in our favor now." Michael gathered the documents into a neat stack. "Their claim to the police, that you were confused due to surgery, could be seen as elder abuse, using your medical condition to dismiss legitimate concerns about your property rights. The irony was perfect. Their manipulation strategy had created evidence of the very behavior that justified gift revocation. How long before this is final? Assuming they don't contest, and I suspect they won't once they understand the legal reality, you could have full possession back within 60 days. Michael sealed the documents in an official envelope. However, the psychological impact will be immediate. They'll realize that their control over this situation was always an illusion. Standing to leave, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Friday afternoon. Genuine optimism. The law was on my side. I had professional representation, and my family was about to learn that treating your elderly father like an inconvenience carries consequences. Michael, I can't thank you enough for meeting me today. Mr. Richardson, what happened to you this weekend was unconscionable. I'm glad we can correct it. He handed me the envelope containing copies of the legal documents. I'll call you tomorrow once the process server has been scheduled. Walking toward the office door, I realized that everything had changed. I was no longer a confused old man making baseless accusations. I was a property owner exercising his legal rights with professional representation and due process of law. The drive home would give me time to plan exactly how I wanted to handle the next phase of this situation. Monday morning brought clarity and official documents printed on Michael O'Connor's letterhead. I stood in the living room holding papers that would change everything, waiting for the perfect moment to reclaim what had always been mine. Haley was in the kitchen making coffee, moving with the casual confidence of someone who believed she owned the house around her. Keon sat at the dining table, scrolling through his phone, probably planning his day without any awareness that his world was about to collapse. Haley, Kyan, I need you both in here. My voice carried an authority they hadn't heard before. Not the confused, pleading tone of a sick old man asking for water, but the firm command of someone holding all the cards. They exchanged glances as they moved into the living room. Haley's expression showed mild annoyance, as if I were interrupting something important, rather than about to deliver the most significant news of their adult lives. I held up the documents, making sure they could see the official letterhead and formal legal formatting. These are eviction notices. You have 72 hours to remove yourselves and all your belongings from my property. The silence that followed was profound. Haley's coffee mug stopped halfway to her lips, suspended in disbelief. Kyan's phone screen went dark as his grip loosened. What are you talking about? Haley's voice carried the first hint of uncertainty I'd heard from her since Friday. I'm talking about the legal reality you chose to ignore. I unfolded the first document and began reading. Notice of gift revocation. Pursuant to Washington state property law, the undersigned property owner hereby revokes the gift deed executed in favor of Haley Richardson on the grounds of material ingratitude and breach of implied conditions. Kyan stood up abruptly. You can't be serious. This house is ours. We live here. You lived here at my discretion, which you forfeited when you decided to treat me like an unwelcome stranger in my own home. I continued reading from the legal document. Specific grounds include hostile treatment of the grantor, failure to provide reasonable care during medical recovery, and deliberate confinement against the grantor's will. Haley sat down her coffee with shaking hands. Dad, this is crazy. You can't just kick us out. We have nowhere to go. That's not my concern anymore. The words felt liberating. You had the opportunity to treat your recovering father with basic human decency. Instead, you chose cruelty and manipulation. But the police said you were confused. Keon's voice rose with desperation. You were having post-surgical problems. The police said what you convinced them to say. My lawyer was very interested in that detail when I explained how you used my medical condition to dismiss my legitimate concerns about property rights. Reading the legal consequences aloud gave each word extra weight. Failure to vacate within 72 hours will result in formal eviction proceedings and potential charges of unlawful possession. Haley sank into the chair, her face pale. You actually went to a lawyer. I went to my lawyer, the same one who handled the original gift deed 5 years ago. He was fascinated to learn how you've been treating the grantor of your free housing. Dad, please. Haley's voice cracked with the first genuine emotion I had heard from her since this began. We can work this out. We can change. I know we've been difficult, but we can fix this. 72 hours. I folded the documents back into their official envelope. Starting now. Con moved closer, his posture aggressive. You think you can just threaten us after everything we've done for you? Everything you've done for me. The irony was breathtaking. You locked me in a bedroom and convinced police officers I was mentally incompetent. Exactly. What have you done for me? We let you live here, Haley protested. You let me live in my own house. I placed the legal documents on the coffee table where they couldn't ignore them. The house I bought with my own money and gave to you as a gift, thinking you would provide the love and care that justified such generosity. The room fell quiet, except for the sound of Haley's increasingly rapid breathing. The papers sat between us like a bridge they couldn't cross, separating their old world of entitlement from the new reality of consequences. Where are we supposed to go? Keon asked, his voice smaller now. That's something you should have considered before deciding I wasn't worth basic human kindness. I moved toward the hallway, leaving them to process their new circumstances. 2 hours. The clock is ticking. Behind me, I could hear Haley beginning to cry, and Keon's voice rising as he started making urgent phone calls. The sound of their panic was the sweetest music I had heard in years. But I wasn't finished with them yet. They still didn't understand the full scope of what they had lost, or why this house had meant so much to me in the first place. Tuesday afternoon found us sitting around the kitchen table like a family again, though the dynamic had shifted completely since Monday morning. Haley's eyes were red from crying, and Ken looked like he hadn't slept in 2 days. The eviction notice lay between us like a ticking bomb. Dad, please. Haley's voice carried a desperation I had never heard before. We know we made mistakes. We know we treated you badly, but we can change. We can be the family you deserve. I sat quietly, letting her words fill the space between us. On the table in front of me lay a manila folder I had retrieved from my filing cabinet that morning. Documents they had never seen before. We were stressed about your surgery, Con added, leaning forward earnestly. We didn't handle it well, but that doesn't mean we don't love you. This is our home, our family. Your home, I repeated thoughtfully. Tell me, Haley, do you remember how I was able to buy this house? She wiped her eyes with a tissue. You said you had saved money from your contracting business. That's partially true. But where do you think the down payment came from? A house this size in this neighborhood that required substantial money up front. Haley and Con exchanged glances. I don't know. Your savings. I opened the manila folder and spread several documents across the table. Official letterhead from Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company. Death certificates, beneficiary claim forms, all dated 5 years ago. This house was bought with the insurance money from your mother's death. The silence that followed was absolute. Haley stared at the papers as if they were written in a foreign language. Her face went through several expressions: confusion, disbelief, and then a dawning horror that was painful to watch. The life insurance policy your mother maintained for 20 years specifically to provide security for our family. I pointed to the beneficiary designation form, $350,000, paid out 6 months after the funeral. Haley's hands trembled as she picked up the insurance documents. But you said you never told me. I didn't tell you because I didn't want you to feel guilty about living in a house that your mother's death had purchased. I wanted you to see it as a gift from a loving father, not as something bought with tragedy. Kayan reached over to read the papers over Haley's shoulder. I don't understand. Why are you telling us this now? Because I want you to understand exactly what you've done. My voice remained calm, but each word carried the weight of 5 years of grief and planning. This house where you locked me in a bedroom, where you told the police I was mentally incompetent, where you refused to bring me a glass of water after heart surgery, was purchased with money from your mother's life insurance policy. Haley made a sound that was part gasp. The insurance papers slipped from her fingers and scattered across the table. She died believing she was providing security for our family. She talked about it during her final weeks, how the insurance money would make sure we always had a safe place to live, that we would take care of each other. I gathered the documents back into a neat pile. She made me promise to use that money to keep our family together. Dad? I didn't know. Haley's voice broke completely. You didn't know because I protected you from that knowledge, just like your mother protected us with that insurance policy. Just like I protected you by giving you this house as a gift, instead of telling you it was purchased with your mother's sacrifice. Con put his arm around Haley as she began to cry in earnest. We can fix this. We can honor her memory properly. Can you? I asked, quietly. Can you undo treating me like an unwelcome stranger in a house that your mother's death provided? Can you take back telling police officers that I was confused and incompetent in the home she intended as our family sanctuary? Haley looked up at me with tears streaming down her face. I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry. I had no idea. Your mother would be heartbroken to know that the house she thought would bring our family together became the place where her daughter chose cruelty over compassion. I stood up from the table, leaving the insurance documents where they lay. She would be devastated to learn that her final gift to our family was used as a weapon against the father she loved. The weight of moral reality settled over them like a heavy blanket. This wasn't just about legal ownership or family disputes anymore. This was about violating the sacred trust of a woman who had died, believing her sacrifice would protect the people she loved most. What can we do? Haley whispered. How can we make this right? I looked at my daughter, my broken, desperate daughter, who had finally understood the full scope of what she had lost, and felt something that might have been pity mixed with the satisfaction of justice finally served. You have 44 hours, I said, simply. Thursday afternoon brought the sound of cardboard boxes being taped shut and furniture being moved across hardwood floors. I sat in my recliner, watching Haley and Con work with the quiet efficiency of people who had finally accepted their fate. The past 50 hours had transformed them completely. Gone was the arrogance, the entitlement, the casual cruelty that had defined our relationship since my surgery. In its place was something I had never seen from them before. Genuine remorse, mixed with the hollow exhaustion of people who had learned what it meant to lose everything. Keon carried the last of their boxes through the living room, avoiding my eyes as he had for the past 2 days. Haley followed with a suitcase, her movements careful and deliberate, as if she were walking through a house that might collapse at any moment. That's everything from upstairs, she said quietly, setting the suitcase near the front door with the rest of their belongings. I nodded, but didn't speak. There wasn't much left to say that hadn't already been said Tuesday afternoon, when the insurance papers had shattered their world into pieces they couldn't put back together. The house keys lay on the coffee table between us, still attached to the keychain Haley had bought when I first gave her the house 5 years ago. A little silver charm that read, "Home, Sweet Home." Ironic now, considering how sweet this home had proven not to be for the man who had made it possible. "Dad," Haley said, approaching my chair with the hesitant steps of someone who wasn't sure they had the right to speak. "I need you to know that I understand what we did." What I did. I looked up at her. My daughter, who had spent the last 72 hours coming to terms with the fact that she had been cruel to her father in a house that her mother's death had purchased for their family's security. "I know you do," I replied. Kyan appeared in the doorway, car keys in his hand. "Everything's loaded. We're ready to go." Haley picked up the house keys from the coffee table, holding them for a moment as if they weighed more than metal and plastic had any right to weigh. When she handed them to me, her fingers trembled slightly. "These belong to you," she whispered. The keys felt warm in my palm, though whether from Haley's touch or from the symbolic weight of reclaimed ownership, I couldn't tell. They always did. She nodded, understanding the deeper truth in those words. This house had always been mine, legally, morally, and in every way that mattered. She had simply been allowed to live here through my generosity, a generosity she had repaid with contempt and cruelty. "I'm sorry about Mom," she said, her voice breaking slightly. "I'm sorry we dishonored her memory in the house she provided for us. Your mother would have wanted you to treat me with love and respect," I said calmly. "She would have been heartbroken to see what you chose instead." Con stepped forward, extending his hand toward me. "Mr. Richardson, I want you to know that I take full responsibility for my part in this. I supported Haley's behavior, and I participated in treating you badly. That was wrong." I shook his hand briefly. "Now you know what it means to lose a home." The words carried the weight of perfect justice. They had made me feel unwelcome in my own house, had treated me like a burden in the place where I should have felt most secure. Now they would learn what it felt like to be homeless, to have no place that was truly theirs. They walked toward the door together, Haley pausing at the threshold to look back one final time. "Will you ever forgive us?" "That's not the question you should be asking," I replied. "The question is whether you'll remember this lesson well enough to treat the next person with the kindness you should have shown me." The door closed behind them with the soft click of finality. Through the window, I watched them load their remaining belongings into their car and drive away from the property that would never again be their home. Silence settled over the house like a comfortable blanket. For the first time in almost a week, I was alone in my own home without the weight of family tension or the threat of being treated like an unwelcome stranger in my own domain. I looked down at the keys in my hand, then at the insurance papers still scattered across the coffee table. Sarah would have been proud to see justice finally served, to know that her sacrifice had ultimately protected the family she had loved, even if it had taken longer than anyone might have expected. Walking through the rooms of my house, truly my house again, I felt something I hadn't experienced since before my surgery. Peace, not the peace of revenge, but the deeper satisfaction of justice properly served and lessons properly learned. Outside, the spring afternoon continued its gentle progression towards evening, and I was home. If you like this story, please like this video Subscribe to the channel and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.